Welcome back to BetterAvecBourbon. Today we'll be reviewing several Canadian whiskies, with some brands you'll recognize like the infamous Canadian Club, new faces like Bearface, and others like Gooderham Worts with a storied past that's mostly forgotten. But let's go through the full lineup, shall we? Starting off, the 40 Creek Maplewood Select. I couldn't find anything conclusive on its mash bill, but originally released in 2000, it's a blend of individually distilled and aged rye, barley, and corn, blended and then, according to 40 Creek, infused with a unique flavoring derived from kiln-dried sugar maplewood. 40 Creek is made in Grimsby, Ontario, but the brand is owned by Campari. Next, the Canadian Club 12 Years. I don't have the exact mash bill, but it's blended whiskey where first corn, rye malt, and barley malt are distilled separately, then blended together before barrel aging. I've had quite a bit of their standard white label with Canada Dry, so I figured I'd use this as an opportunity to see how their age statement products are. Canadian Club is made by Hiram Walker and Sons Limited at its distillery in Windsor, Ontario, but is owned by Suntory Global Spirits. Next, we have No.40 Dark Oak. It is 100% rye whiskey, aged in new American oak barrels, and finished in a heavily charred new oak barrel. It's also made by Hiram Walker and Sons Limited at its distillery in Windsor, Ontario, but is owned by Pernod Ricard. The Bearface Triple Oak is likely the most bourbon-like on this list, with a mash bill of 100% corn, but tastes very unique due to its aging process we'll get into later. Bearface is made in Ontario and British Columbia, and is Canadian owned. And lastly, we have Gooderham Worts. It is a blend of corn, rye, wheat, and barley, so a very complex and mysterious mash bill. Historically made in the Toronto Distillery District, it is now also made by Hiram Walker and Sons Limited at its distillery in Windsor, Ontario, and is also owned by Pernod Ricard. Is Windsor the whiskey capital of Canada? Now that we know the lineup, gather your Glencairns, your Whiskies, and let's get to it. First, the Bearface Triple Oak. It's 42.5% ABV and costs $40 all in at the LCBO. According to Bearface's website, it is a single grain Canadian whiskey aged in ex-bourbon American oak barrels, then aged in French oak red wine casks and air-dried virgin Hungarian oak. Another interesting part of their process is what they call elemental aging, which they define as their unique process where hand-selected oak casks are matured in repurposed shipping containers and exposed to the elements in the Canadian wilderness. Our extreme northern climate amplifies how the whiskey and wood interact, transforming the liquid inside. One odd thing I noticed while researching them that's different between their American and Canadian product is the US page says 7 years and has an image of a more copper-colored product, whereas the Canadian page has no age statement and the bottle appears to be more red, blood orange. The 7 years is specifically flagged under the American oak aging that I'll dive into shortly. An odd discrepancy that I'd hope does not mean Canadians receive an inferior product, but recent reviews on the LCBO site seem to indicate the more contemporary product is younger and worse. Not a great look for a company trying to convert bourbon drinkers. Bearface provides a lot of information on the nose and taste of each of these three casks, about what they should impart individually, which I'll link below. On the nose, we have notes of honey, butter, natural vanilla, cranberry, pear, unique spice with rye-like notes, and a gentle smoke. For the nose, I get cherry, vanilla, and complex oak. Next, we have the historic Canadian Club with their 12-year entry. It's 40% ABV and $34.75 all in at the LCBO, which makes me a little skeptical of the 12-year age statement. For aroma, they say soft, round, fully balanced and creamy, fruity and firm. For the nose, I get cherry coke, sweet, a little bit of oak, and a good amount of vanilla and red fruit. Next, we have the 40 Creek Maplewood Select. It's 45% ABV and a more premium entry at $90 all in at the LCBO. There's no age statement, but it would have to meet the minimum Canadian whiskey requirements of 3 years aged. For aromas, they say ripe berry, fresh corn, and white pepper on the nose. For me, on the nose I get a good amount of spice and some maple caramel sweetness. I realized partway through that I did not have enough Glencairns for all 5 of these drinks since I only have 4. So I transferred the CC into a smaller cup, this dainty shot glass, in hopes that no one would care. Next, we have the No.40 Dark Oak. It's 48% ABV and is on the pricier side for Canadian whiskey, but isn't unreasonable at $63.95 all in at the LCBO. No age statement, but it would have to meet the Canadian whiskey minimum of 3 years. I couldn't find a direct source, but the LCBO, the main seller of it, says to expect aromas and flavors of caramel, vanilla, apricot, baking spice, and a hint of floral notes. It's full-bodied and fruity with a long-lasting finish. For the nose, I get deep oak, subtle spice, and some slight red fruit. And lastly, we have Gooderham Worts. It's 44.4% ABV and costs $42.45, all in at the LCBO. According to JP Weiser's site, who shares the same parent company, Gooderham is a premium 4-grain Canadian whiskey that celebrates the history of Gooderham Worts, which at one point was the largest distillery in the world. It's not clear if this whiskey is anything like the old Gooderham whiskey, but it's certainly meant to celebrate that legacy. There's no age statement, but we'll assume it's somewhere north of the minimum 3 years required for Canadian whiskey. According to the LCBO, we should expect notes of honey, toffee, dried flowers, and bubblegum. For the nose, I get vanilla, caramel, oak, and green apple. So for me, that's kind of my standard bourbon smells as well. Now for the tastings. Starting with Bearface Triple Cask, for tasting notes, they have honey, marzipan, creme brulee, butter, natural vanilla, dry fruits, and cranberry. Subtle flavors of saffron, balsamic, apricot, a hint of pear, spice, black cardamom, orange peel, mandarin, brown sugar, and smoke. That's quite the mouthful, but how does the whiskey hold up? For tasting, I get red fruit and oak sandalwood, some vanilla at the back of the palate. It's a pretty good whiskey, but despite the high corn, it really has more of a rye quality to it with all the spice flavors. For the Canadian Club 12-year, for tasting notes, they have delicate spiciness and creamy vanilla, in balance with rich wood and luxurious honey, with a long and dry finish, with an enduring presence of butterscotch. Upon tasting it, I get vanilla and butterscotch, and an almost artificial cherry, perhaps from all the vanilla. I don't have anything to base this on, but it tastes a bit artificially sweetened to me, and it's a bit thin for something aged 12 years. I don't think you'd want this neat, but I bet it'd be delicious with some cola. For the 40 Creek Maplewood Select, they say for finish there should be smooth and lingering spice notes, rounded out with the flavor of sugar maplewood. For tasting, I get spice, salted maple caramel, and some gentle oak. This is a solid whiskey to have neat or in more whiskey-centric cocktails like the Old Fashioned or the Manhattan. For the No.40 Dark Oak, tasting notes, they don't provide much other than it's full-bodied and fruity with a long-lasting finish, very unspecific. And upon tasting, it's a bolder oak than I expected, blended with spice, and the red fruit is still there, but minimized in the face of the bold oak and 100% rye blend. This is an exciting one to play with, as having 48% ABV means it will hold up well in most cocktails, whereas most rye blends tend to disappear or become muted when mixed. I'm excited to use this in Manhattans and the Toronto cocktail. Lastly, we have Gooderham Worts. For tasting notes, they say the palate is rich and full, with a smooth, viscous mouthfeel and flavors of sweet floral and stone fruit, followed by a medium-length spicy finish. And upon tasting, like a high rye bourbon but mellowed by the barley, spicy but very classic toffee caramel. It's lovely and probably the best bourbon replacement of the lot. It is a bit thinner than I'd like, but it's extremely approachable. It's great neat and makes a very drinkable old-fashioned, and would work well in most bourbon cocktails, though if you like a higher proof, consider dialing up the amount of whiskey you add. Final thoughts, I think there's something for everyone on this list. If you don't like the traditional rye or bourbon, something like Canadian Club might be appealing as it's very well reviewed. 40 Creek Maplewood Select and Gooderham Worts fall into the high rye bourbon camp, so if you like something like the Old Forester 1910 or 1792 bourbon, these could be the ones to check out. And lastly, No.40 Dark Oak, a really bold and surprising Canadian whiskey entry in the market where most Canadian whiskey is guilty of being a bit thin and sticking to 40% ABV. The higher proof and bold flavors offer a great alternative for those who like a bolder whiskey, and even challenges a lot of the American rye household names. But more on that in another video. Thanks everyone for watching. Do you have a favorite Canadian whiskey not found on this list? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, hit that like button, press subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.